Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Dorrington, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar brought to you by Anthrolytics. Today, we're going to talk about why empathy at scale is the new competitive differentiator. And before I do that, I'd like to just say a couple of words about myself and Anthrolytics. So firstly, for me, I've had 40 years kicking around doing a variety of practical hands-on roles in business and industry, but the last 20 years or so have been spent in data science, and the last 7 of those in combining behavioral science with data science, so that I could get a better understanding of why people do what they do, what they're going to do next, and what businesses ought to do about that. And that's along the whole of the value chain. So it's customer experience, employee experience, even supplier experience or supplier relationship management. Now, in 2021, my co-founders and I formed Anthrolytics, which is a software as a service company delivering measurable outcomes on customer experience based on some of the work that I've been doing in what I call predictive behavioral analytics. And that is to, in this case, find out what customers genuinely care about, not just what they say they care about, how they feel about those things, why they care, how those feelings influence their behavior, and then constantly reassessing that so that we always have a current view about how they feel about an organization or brand, so that you can select the optimum next best action based on delivering an empathetic experience. So that's me, and that's Anthrolytics. You can find out more at our website, anthrolytics.io. So then, what is digital empathy? Well, in answering that, let's first look at what do we mean by empathy. Now, I've heard a number of definitions for empathy. Perhaps one of them that you're familiar with is when you walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. But I also think that it's about when we share the emotions and experiences of others by imagining what it would be like to be them. Now, this is different from sympathy. Sympathy is where we have emotions that are about ourselves and how we feel about somebody else's circumstances, irrespective of how they feel. Empathy is when we feel broadly aligned emotions based around circumstances. As I said, imagining what it's like to be them. Itself, empathy is derived or broken down into 3 main areas. First of which is cognitive empathy. That's knowing how the other person feels and what they may be thinking and why. One we're more familiar perhaps as human beings is emotional empathy, and that are the feelings that we feel as a result of identifying those feelings in others. And it's a constituent of emotional intelligence, which is much more than empathy, but it definitely requires that we understand the feelings of others and our own feelings, and then that we act accordingly. And speaking of acting accordingly brings me to the 3rd component of empathy, which is compassionate empathy or affective empathy. And that's where we take action as a result of those feelings. So if we just had cognitive empathy and we just had emotional empathy, that may be all well and good, but unless we do something about it, it's not true empathy in the sense that we would use it within business. So digital empathy is part of that broader spectrum. And what it does is recognize that, firstly, computers do not feel emotions. We can synthesize those. We can come up with things that look like they're empathy, but computers don't feel. So we have to focus on the other 2, using computers and software to identify emotionality in others, and then choosing an outcome or an action as a result of those. So if we look at this chain below, it starts on the driver. What's the stimulus, the circumstances, what's causing these feelings? So those feelings are felt by the subject person, and we recognize those feelings using cognitive empathy. We then use those insights to drive action within a business context. And those actions might be, for example, to orchestrate a journey. So we have somebody go down the green path rather than the blue path. It may be part of the way that we enable or enhance automation. So what steps do the bots take? Do they take step 1, 2, 3, or is it step 1, 3, 2, depending upon the circumstances of the subject? And finally, how we choose actions. And this may not be just an emotive action. It may simply choose whether I use product A or product B, or I use language A versus language B. So digital empathy is the combination of cognitive empathy and compassionate empathy. thinking, feeling, and action. Ultimately, what's it about is treating customers the way that they want to be treated rather than the way that we want to be treated. True empathy is all about the other person and how we feel about that. It's not about what we feel or what we want, at least not by itself. Now, when I started out down this field and we were looking at things like emotion analytics and the role of empathy in business, there was a lot of resistance, a lot of people saying, yes, well, that's all well and good, but it's unquantifiable. You know, we can treat people well, and but does it impact the bottom line? Because it sounds to me like it's just a lot of cost with no outcome that I can measurably hang on that. Well, that's definitely not the case. And I want to explain firstly why it's so important, and then why it is measurable and quantifiable. So why is it important? Well, the first thing is that, and by the way, this was happening long before pandemic, but when businesses moved online, what they found was that they're in a very highly competed marketplace. They're competing with their competitors on a global stage. But the way that customers navigate that is to use common search terms, some criteria that they want to use. And what the customers are trying to do is find people who might be able to solve their problem. And they want to do that with the minimum amount of effort and the minimum amount of complexity. For example, a very good version of that is comparison websites, where you can choose the things that you want from products, and it will go and find you a whole list of people that can meet those criteria. And typically the price is the main factor that determines whether you go for the top ranked vendor or one that's in the top 2 or 3. So the problem with that for businesses is that when many of them moved online, as I say, it was extremely competitive. And as a result of having to describe themselves in the terms that everybody else uses, you become a commodity. You're defined by what you have in common with your competitors rather than what sets you apart. And so that's a major challenge for businesses because, as I said, often the decision then just comes down to price. But you may think, well, we offer a really good service. We have excellent product quality and excellent customer service. Unfortunately, so do most of your competitors. So that isn't the differentiator that it used to be. Customers just expect that now. They expect you to do a good job of what they pay you to do. So the quality of your product, unless it is truly different and in a different league to the others, is not the differentiator it used to be. And in the case of digital, as I say, the problem is that once you're a commodity, once that people find you on a comparison website, or they find you using a simple search using commonly used terms, you begin to become less relevant and important to them. So loyalty falls away because they recognize that as a commodity, I can buy it whenever I want to, from wherever I want to, and it's broadly all the same. All of the vendors of that commodity are offering pretty much the same thing. So it'll just come down to when I want it, I'll buy it, and I'll buy it at the best possible price. There isn't the loyalty that we used to expect, even when we use mechanisms like loyalty card to try and drive that. Nonetheless, lots of businesses, when they focus on customer experience, focus on the efficiency of the service. Is it low effort? Is it frictionless? How quickly can we get from A to B on a customer journey? And don't get me wrong, that's important. But unfortunately, all your competitors are doing exactly the same thing. They're all taking friction out of their experiences. They're all trying to help customers navigate the journey as quickly as possible. Typically, what they don't often think about is the value of that experience to the customer. Why would the customer care about this? Does the fact that you answer the phone within 3 rings instead of 5 really mean anything to them? And the other thing that's been a challenge for many businesses is that measures of satisfaction in a commodity marketplace aren't really predictive. After all, if you're doing what the customer paid you to do and you're a commodity and they're not particularly loyal, then why should they evaluate you any higher than anybody else? And typically what they're evaluating you against is not some universally agreed scale where 8 means 8 to everybody. It's completely subjectively measured against the customer's expectations. So what did they think was going to happen, and how do you measure up against that? And of course, those expectations are set by their own experiences, by the influences of the marketplace, your competitors, and circumstances. So satisfaction is not the predictor it used to be. It is a good early warning system. Low satisfaction often tells you there's something broken in your process, but it doesn't give you indications of how to differentiate. So in order to address that, what we need is a mechanism of understanding customers better so that we can tailor the experiences that we deliver and make them empathetic. And why is empathy so important? Well, there are a number of things that come into this, but I want to just pick on a couple of pieces of research. First of which is from a study that was done a little while ago. And what we did there was we looked at customers who'd called customer services and they were in an emotional state. So they weren't just phoning up with a completely rational set of criteria. They actually were feeling something about this. Now, as you might expect, when you were able to resolve a customer problem and you did it by listening to them and treating them empathetically like a human being rather than a walking bank account, satisfaction scores were off the chart. So people love that. They love getting what they want and they love being treated like they're valuable and important and different. And the obverse is also true. If you don't give people what they want and you treat them badly, you treat them like a number, like you don't really care, of course the satisfaction scores fall off a cliff. That's entirely to be anticipated, and I think is absolutely intuitive. What wasn't quite so intuitive is what happened in the middle, in that let's take the two of the other cases, where the customer didn't get what they want, but that they were treated with empathy, that the agent or the customer service rep took the time to listen to them, to understand their concerns, and then talk to them as a human being. When you said no to people, but you treated them in this way, they actually preferred it to getting what they want, but being treated like just a number, like just another customer. And so this is perhaps counterintuitive. So many businesses invest so much money on trying to meet every customer's demand, everything that the customer says that they want. Perhaps it harks back to that phrase, the customer is always right. In fact, the customer is often wrong. And many times they would call and they perhaps half-heartedly think, well, I don't think it's very likely that I'll get this, but I'll try. But if they feel that they've been listened to, that somebody's taken the time to pay attention to their concerns and what it is they're wanting to, even if you can't satisfy that, if you've made that investment in time, if you've made that investment in being empathetic with that customer and establishing rapport, you can tell them no, and they still evaluate that as a good customer experience. So that was the first study. It was a couple of years ago, but then we did another one a year later and the findings were pretty much identical. And study after study reports very similar things. The other study was the things that people value in relationships with businesses. And these are the top three, the characteristics of empathy that customers value. First of which, they want to feel listened to. 84% said, I want you to listen to me. I want to feel heard. They also want to be understood. So you not just listen to them, you take the time to understand what that means to that customer, what it means to your relationship. And then you treat them with consistency. That actually makes you predictable, by the way, which is one of the foundations of trust. So that when people feel they're listened to, that they're treated consistently and fairly, it establishes trust. All of those are critical to good business value. And of course, they do want to get their problems solved. They do want to be able to do that with the minimum of effort and show that their time is valued. But it is that listen to me, take the time to understand me, treat me fairly and consistently, which are at the top three. Those things don't necessarily cost money. They may take a little bit of time from your business, but actually it often results in people not calling back a second time, not being dissatisfied, or then flaming you on social media. So I would hazard a guess that actually you're much better off by spending that investment in time than in desperately trying to figure out, well, what can I use to try and rent or lease this customer's loyalty or their good feelings towards me. So that's the importance of empathy. Let's look at what it meant in practice. So in the first scenario, case study one, it was with a business to consumer telco, millions of customers, very aggressive growth targets. They do want to grow quickly. They do want to get more upsell. And what we did with these customers is we actually looked at them and said, well, we want to find people that are very receptive. That is, we think that they're open to a marketing or a sales campaign, as well as meeting the criteria of they can afford it, it's the right product for them, and so on. And we took that group and the most receptive group, and we designed an upsell campaign for them and executed it for 1 month. Now, typically with this customer, what they saw in marketing campaigns were small incremental improvements in ARPU, average revenue per user, prior to this campaign. This campaign delivered a 90% uplift in revenue in the first month. And actually, even though we monitored them for several months afterwards, and I haven't shown it here, that effect persisted even though we weren't marketing to them. So we affected the way that they behaved. They did buy more, they upsold, and they stayed sold as a result of that. So it was a long-lasting effect, not just a single month. But the single month alone was dramatically better than prior campaigns. So that was the first case study. Let's take a different one. In the second case, it's a business-to-consumer retail bank, so high street bank. And this was one with millions of customers. And here what we wanted to do was to identify people who may potentially churn before they churn. This is a big question for businesses. They want to understand, well, the first we might know that a customer is unhappy is when they come in and they cancel their account. We want to be able to anticipate that. And if we could do that early, that would help us take a cheaper remediation action whilst that customer is still open to the idea of being won back, rather than trying to reclaim them once they've already got one foot out of the door or they've already decided that they've had enough. So we did a similar kind of survey. We looked at the people, we analyzed the results, and what we found is these people we thought were potential churners. So what would happen is that, as the customer worked, their experience had more negative results, they became a churn risk. We then did a remedial campaign. So we did something to say, hey, we love you. We're sorry that we got it wrong on this time. That's where that was appropriate, by the way, not to everybody. And so we put them into a slightly more positive mindset. Now, if we'd continued on that vein, then what we might have done is got them to the point where, like we talked about in the previous case, their mindset is so positive that we can now upsell to them, or we can cross-sell them another product. We can actually secure their business in the long term. So this was a very dramatic reduction in churn compared to a control group, but it was also a case of we could control the costs of this. Now, if we look at these two campaigns together, what we saw was we have an opportunity to market to only those people that want to hear from us and not the ones that don't. And we can reach out to those components that may not be well disposed towards us and try and heal the relationship to the point where we can then sell to them. So what we did in the third case, which was with a business-to-business organization, and yes, you can use these techniques in B2B, was to look at different empagraphic segments. That is, people that belong to homogeneous groups that share sets of feelings. I'll talk about the feelings in just a moment. One of the problems that many of the ROI models that CX professionals use is that they average stuff out. So they would say, well, let's look at the level of satisfaction and the average revenue that we would get for people at different points in that satisfaction curve. But of course, humanity is much more complex than that. And when you look at these empagraphic segments, these people typified by what they feel, here are some examples of what we found. So you might have a segment that's called the overlooked and neglected. These people would typically say, you never sell me anything, you never offer me anything unless you want something from me in return. You're doing an okay job. I'm not so upset that I'm going to cancel right now, but neither am I going to respond to any of your marketing campaigns. I'm certainly not going to buy anything more from you. We took that group, and when you market to them to improve the way that they think about the organization, the ROI was dramatically positive. That is, it didn't take much to get them to feel better about you as a brand, but as a result, they were much more responsive to marketing. They spent more money, they redeemed more coupons, and so on. So that was the overlooked and neglected when we made them feel like they were valued. But in the middle was an interesting case, what we call here the neutrally satisfied. These are people that think you're doing an okay job, that you're meeting all of their needs. And we did what many people tried to do and say, well, let's increase their net level of satisfaction or happiness by investing in things that make them feel happy. We could do that. It took a lot of money to actually get them to feel more happy. We had to make them offers. We had to show them additional ways that we'd invest in the relationship first and they return. The interesting thing is that even when they were more happy, they were not that much better in terms of economic activity. So we got negative ROI. We spent more money making them happy than we got in return for them spending with us. So the neutrally satisfied, very different group. And the third group I'd like to talk about is what I call the surprised and delighted. These are people, often they're younger people with less life experience. You show them ways that you can help them. You show them new things that they didn't expect. And they would be, yeah, great. Where do I sign? This is so helpful to me. So this is a group that not only could you make them much more happier than they were already happy, but now you could get them to approach the point of ecstasy, but they were taking on lots more products and services. And in fact, they were the second best performing group compared to the overlooked and neglected. There's one more group in here that I'd like to draw on. That's the purple line. Those whose circumstances have changed. So they may not feel more or less satisfied with you as an organization, but maybe affordability has become an issue, or price is critical to them, or availability. You've just closed your local branch. They can't get to you anymore. So satisfaction there doesn't really mean anything to these people. Their behavior is driven by other things. And one thing I'd like to say is that I've put this as satisfaction versus revenue because I've seen graphs like this everywhere. Actually, I think satisfaction is a very poor predictor of this. What I'd rather say is, as I described a little earlier, receptivity. How do they feel about you? Do they want to hear from you? Do they want to continue to do business with you? Do they feel valued? Do they feel that they're getting something out of it? So that's the theory, and that's the reason why we would do it. It's good for business. It actually has quantifiable business results because this is all done with data, and as a result, it's quantifiable. So we can say that A plus B equals C. So if you invest in this, and this is the set of circumstances, these are the outcomes that you can get. We can see that different empagraphic segments may have different financial contributions. We get a level of nuance we couldn't get before. But how do we do it in practice? What does this actually look like? Well, a lot of it's going to be reliant on how much you know about customers. After all, you can't be empathetic with somebody you don't know anything about. So the problem here is customer fatigue. We're fed up of being constantly asked, how do we feel about things, constantly asked to review things. We get these long surveys with lots and lots of questions that ask us to invest a lot of time and energy in completing them with a rather questionable result in, well, what does that mean for me? What do I get out of this? So often what we hear is organizations saying, well, we're trying to get a 360-degree view of the customer. The only way we know how to do that is to constantly keep asking them, constantly keep directly observing them. And that comes with a whole slew of problems, not least of which is many customers are getting fed up and they're setting privacy settings so that you can't do it. But there's a bigger problem even than that. Even if you could do that, typically it's for a tiny proportion of your overall customer population. So typically most businesses are not talking to their customers on a daily basis. They're talking to a small group of customers on a once or twice a year basis. And from those small groups, they're trying to identify big things, big trends, big drivers of behavior. Now, this is one of the challenges I originally set out to try and solve. Because if we are saying, well, the data you collect only represents less than 5% of your customer base at a moment in time, but what you need in order to deliver empathy at an individual level is 100% of data on 100% of the customers all of the time, clearly these two things are very different. And to give you a different analogy, what if your CFO came to the leadership team and said, I want to completely transform the way that this business operates, and I'm going to do that on taking a sample of 5% of the financial data of the business and use that to drive all my decision making. I think that you, like me, would probably raise an eyebrow and wonder, why are we doing that? So this is the other challenge. Not only is it very difficult to get customers to complete voice of the customer programs and to tell us what they're really interested in, it's very difficult to then extrapolate that along 100% of the population. You're sampling, you're not taking the 100% route. Now I'm going to talk about how I resolve that in a moment, but before I do, I just want to talk a little bit about the theory. So the theory is really based on a couple of things. The neuroscience here is very clear. All the decisions we make as human beings have a combination of what we rationally, cognitively, consciously think about. Does it do the job I need it to do? Is it affordable? Is it accessible? And so on. And the psychological, emotional things. How do I want to feel? I want to feel happier or less afraid. I want more confidence about the future. Now, that isn't to say that all decisions are wholly emotional or wholly rational. There's some blend of both. Okay, so, and it just depends upon the context, which is the next thing that we think about. So then it depends upon what are we trying to do, where, when, how, what channel, and so on. All those things influence a part of our decision. So context is the third thing that I take into account. The fourth thing reflects the fact that we're lazy thinkers. We don't like doing our own original research, so we tend to use things like star ratings and recommendations. I'm sure many of you, like me, have done filters that say, I only want results from a search which are 5 stars or not less than 2 stars, or that have at least 500 positive reviews. So star ratings are very important because it's part of that oxymoron that is the wisdom of crowds. Say oxymoron because it doesn't, just because a crowd says that something is good doesn't mean necessarily that it is. And obviously this disadvantages people who haven't got any reviews yet because they're a new product. So then what we need, what we want, what's the context and stimulus, what do other people say? And then we get the one that was really difficult for me to solve. And this is where I spent the most of my time inventing the techniques to do that. History. I did say that the way that we evaluate experiences is judged on our own experiences. What happened with the last time I tried to do this? What was my last interaction with your brand like? What are the cultural influences on me? So that history really does set a lot about expectations. And as I said, we evaluate everything, including our decisions, about what we expect to happen. And that's very difficult to do because it requires thinking about a lot of data. And one way to try and do that is to build really big, complicated models that absolutely consume mountains of data in order to try and get there. I can tell you that that doesn't work, and there is a way of doing it, but it's so effective that I patented it. The other final thing that goes into the decision making, and is actually the way that we consciously and subconsciously deal with this, is what I call the internal biases. Now, there are two main ones here, the first of which is unconscious bias or prejudice. This is actually heuristics, rules of thumb, things that I've experienced. So one of my rules of thumb might be, I believe all German cars are well made. Therefore, my decision to buy a German car says something about me, that I expect the car to be reliable, well engineered, will last a long time, and so on. So then that doesn't necessarily mean they're rational, but these are the heuristics, the rules of thumb that have worked for me in the past. The other is cognitive bias. That's when we think we're being logical, but we're not really. In particularly anything to do with money and economics, it comes from behavioral economics. So if you've ever left the house and come back with 2 of something you didn't mean to buy 1 of when you left, it's probably a cognitive bias at work that's making you think you're getting some great value deal here. Whereas if you were to look at it in the cold light of day, you realize I've just spent some money on buying 2 of something that I don't really need, but I thought it was such a great deal that I couldn't resist. So I just want to pursue the bit that we focused on at Anthrolytics. So this is where people use this information to make decisions. We looked at the emotions, and I used Plutchik's wheel of emotions here as a framework for how we record emotions. And I did that not because it's a brilliant framework, it's good, but it has a huge canon of work associated with it. So there's lots of additional research, lots of additional studies have been done. It's well understood, so I could find a lot out about it. What was important about this were a few things. Firstly, that in Plutchik's wheel, he said that there are 8 core emotions that are universal. We all feel them. So things like joy and trust and fear and so on. The second thing was that each of those emotions have different levels of arousal or energy. So how intensely do we feel those? In his wheel, the more intense the emotion, the closer to the center it is, and the less intensive, the closer to the periphery it might be. And that there are opposites. So the opposite of joy is clearly sadness. Now, I don't think that all of these actually hang together when you look at it as a model, but nonetheless, it doesn't matter because it works in our context. But there was something else that Plutchik introduced as well. That was that people can feel multiples of these emotions and combinations of these emotions simultaneously. So the Anthrolytics model behind predictive behavioral analytics uses Plutchik's 8 emotions. It says that for each of those emotions, there are different emotional intensity levels, and it's the combinations of those things that define empagraphic segments. That is, a combination of feelings will make me judge an experience or an opportunity or a challenge in a different way. Now, what does that mean in practice? Well, let's take a simplistic example of looking along a notional customer lifetime journey. Now, these are all different for every individual. We may start in the same place, but as our own individual experiences differ, we begin to diverge. But I'm going to use this as a simple example to show the different ways that people might feel at different points in a journey. Just please bear in mind, different people are feeling different things at the same point in that journey. But in this case, start off with marketing. So we raise expectations, people begin to get excited about, okay, I'm really looking forward to getting this, and then they buy it. And their onboarding experience, perhaps it's the unboxing experience, there's feeling a bit of delight, apprehension, perhaps, oh, I'm quite excited, that maybe even a little bit of remorse. Oh, I spent a lot of money on this. I do hope it does what I think it's going to do. So the onboarding experience is a different emotional state. And then as we use it, we become familiar with it and the things that it can do and it can't do, the emotions change again. Less surprise, perhaps a little bit more trust and happiness. Okay, this is doing a good job. But then we get to that service call. Perhaps it's broken down, or it's not doing something you expected it to do, or it's complicated and you can't figure out how I'm supposed to achieve a particular outcome. Again, different emotions. Maybe I'm angry that my German car broke down and now I'm having to call into a garage to get a repair done. And wow, it looks like the repair bill is going to be quite big. And finally, maybe I get to the point where I'm so angry that the emotional tipping point is reached and I decide I've had enough and I'm going to leave you as a brand or an organization. So within anybody's lifetime journey, we feel different things at different times, and a lot of them are based upon circumstances, but definitely based upon how you got to that point in time. So moments that matter differ along the journeys, even for the same person, and different people will be in different emotional states depending upon their personal circumstances. So to do it in practice, there's two things that we need to do. If we want to use empathy to guide our decisions, the first thing we need to do is find out what our customers genuinely care about and what emotions those things elicit. And I call those moments that matter. They're not inflection points. They're not points in a decision where I'm going to go A or B. These are things that I care about. I may not need to make a decision right now, but they'll influence future decisions. So this is where we take data sources about what people care about, what they say, what they, how they describe things, and we identify those moments that matter. If you send somebody an unexpectedly high bill, it's probably going to cause feelings of anger or fear and surprise. And that's going to be part of their cumulative experience of you as a brand, which brings me to the next phase. Once we've figured out what those things are, we can also start to look about, well, what emotions are associated with when people take a particular decision that affects the business, like they buy another product or they leave us as a brand. And this is where we came across the first real challenge with some of the approaches that have been tried so far, in that they try to draw a direct link between a moment that matters and a business outcome. And you may have heard this expressed as things like 70% of customers say they would leave a brand on the first negative experience. Frankly, in most cases, that's not true. Maybe if it's their first experience of you as a brand and you disappoint them straight out of the gate, but actually, if they've taken the time to work with you in the past, they've got to know you, they start to feel very positive towards you, as long as you don't do something catastrophically bad, they may well forgive a mistake or an increase in pricing. So what we need to look at is the cumulative effect of all of the interactions you've had up until that point. And some of those moments that matter generates emotions. And we know that some of those emotions, when they get to a point where they're felt strongly enough, will influence a decision like leave. I am now so angry. You've been irritating me for a year, but at this point, I've decided enough is enough and I'm going to leave you. Or, you've been doing everything right for the last 6 months. I really value you as a brand. You're making a huge difference the way I feel about you. And that's very positive. I'm pretty much bulletproof when it comes to things like churn. For most of us, it's a combination of the two. We've had moments of delight and moments of disappointment, and all of those have influenced the way that we feel. So we take that, and at Anthrolytics, we use a scoring mechanism to identify how people currently feel about your organization or your brand, and we do it for every customer every day. And you feed that into your operational environment where it helps you make better decisions. So you can say, well, okay, we're not going to market to the people that are feeling angry with us right now. What we're going to do is contact those people and see if we can help them feel a more positive light towards us. So the operational environment uses operational data that says, you sent that letter out to these 10,000 people, increasing our price structure. We pretty much feel that all 10,000 feel slightly more negative about us now than they did before, but only some of them now feel so negative that they'll do something about it. So that's the operational environment built into your operations, and it just uses additional data and insights to help you make better decisions. And what does it look like in terms of a flow? Well, we start off with data from your systems of record, your CRM systems, ERP, automation, knowledge management, whatever it may be. From that, we can identify, along with voice of customer data, what it is that your customers care about. Because not everything you do, they care about, but they do care about some things. We put that into the Anthrolytics platform, and we're not an NLP engine. So we're not just looking at the language to try and identify emotions, just give that back to you. Anybody can do that. What we do is use those insights and something that we call predictive behavioral analytics to form that predictive view of how we think somebody's heart set is. How do they feel about you using all of those 8 Plutchik emotions? How much anger are they currently feeling towards you? How much joy, sadness, fear, and so on. And as a result of that, we can then feed that directly into your operational system. And it's just another data point. It's just another model that you bring into your decision flow. And so that can influence things like your CRM systems, agent desktops if you're in a contact center, journey orchestration, so how people navigate the journey, real-time marketing and so on. Loads of things that can influence in your decision-making process that directly result in an outcome. And of course, to close that loop, we feed that back into the systems of record. So we know the things that we did as a result of what somebody felt before. And finally, on the right-hand side, everybody wants to be able to see insights. What's the level of trust in my business? Are my customers more or less happy than they were last week, last month? And how is that impacting my business results? How many people do I have who are receptive to a marketing campaign versus how many of them may be thinking of leaving? And one final thing here I'll say is, I've talked extensively through this webinar about customers. We can do it with employees too. So anyway, that's the process. We take your data, we look at it, we identify the things that people genuinely care about, we feed it into our unique patented scoring system, which gives you an emotional indicator for every customer every day, which you feed into your operational environment, and that helps you make better decisions, more empathetic decisions on the basis of data that you can quantify. So you can take an economic decision as well as an empathetic decision. After all, there's no reason not to treat customers well. There's no reason not to actually respond and acknowledge how they feel, but it may be a reason why you decide to give somebody a bigger offer than others on the basis of, well, that's what they need at this point. Maybe they don't need anything. Maybe they just need us to listen. So then, final thought for you. This week, at the time of going to print with this webinar, we've just released a new white paper. It's about consumer behaviors and motivations. That's designed for a business audience. So it's a simple read. It's not going to take a huge amount of effort to get through there. But what we talk about is, why do customers choose to shop? What do they shop for? And how do they choose between different brands and different products? And within the white paper, we talk about the decision-making model I briefly touched on before. There's also a motivations matrix, which gives you about 40 different criteria that people may be evaluating when they're thinking about that. And that's within a 2x2 framework. So you've got, well, what do they want for themselves, both rationally and functionally, and psychologically and emotionally? So rationality may be, what job does it need to do? How much does it need to cost? Or how cheap does it need to be? Is it accessible? And the rational, functional, psychological bit would be, how do I want to feel about that? Do I want to feel that it's valued on me and so on? The second one on that axis is, what do they want from you as a brand? Why would they choose your brand compared to somebody else that offers a broadly similar kind of outcome? So do they want your brand because it's associated with exclusivity, or that, you know, it's really affordable? There are lots of psychological factors that go in there. So that's in the white paper as well. We explain each of those briefly. We don't need to go into a huge essay on each of them. And one of the things we're very keen is how to break the reliance on perpetual and continual customer surveying. As I say, with so much customer survey fatigue now, it's getting harder and harder to get people to respond to those. There are some specific recommendations, but I'd like you to read it for yourself. And if you'd like to act on any of that or discuss any of it further, then please do just reach out to me. But you can download it from our website at anthrolytics.io/insights. And with that, I'm just going to say thank you very much for your attention today. I would love to hear from you. So if you do want to find out more about any things I've discussed today, then please do reach out at peter@anthrolytics.io. As I say, I'd be delighted to hear from you, and I will answer every email that I get. But with that, all I need to do now is say thank you so much. Thank you for your attention. And until the next time, goodbye, and I hope you stay well. Cheerio now. Bye-bye.